Hi, welcome to James Miller Lifeology, where you learn to simplify and transform your spirit, mind, and body. My name is James Miller. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and a composer. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Let's get started. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to listen to this show. When you're done listening, I hope you take a minute and write a quick review on whichever radio or podcast platform you've heard this show. Your insights will help others to be inspired and encouraged. I have a great show for you today. I'll help you find perspective when it just doesn't make sense. I'll also be interviewing Nancy Bills, whose life was turned upside down in a freak thunderstorm that caused a devastating tragedy. Nancy reviews her book, The Red Ribbon, that is her inspiring memoir that teaches us how to overcome life struggles and turn them into stepping stones. For more information about Nancy, please visit nancybills-memoir.com. You may also purchase her book in the previous guest sections in both stores at either jamesmillerlifeology.com or lifeology.tv. I have some exciting news. Did you know that I'm on the radio 3 times a week? You may hear me on this same station on Tuesdays at 1:30 p.m., Fridays at 9:30 a.m., and Saturday at 12:30 p.m. You may also hear me anytime on iHeartRadio, as well as on all the other major podcasting platforms, including iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, and many others. Simply search for the show name, James Miller Lifeology, or simply go to jamesmillerlifeology.com. Are you struggling to find your purpose? Has mediocrity set in and you can't imagine doing the same thing for the rest of your life? Are your relationships struggling or you aren't sure how to make long-lasting changes? Then contact me, James Miller. I will help you recognize the areas in your life that are going really well, and then we will look at the areas in which you're struggling. We will create actionable solutions to help you create long-lasting changes. You don't have to do this alone. Go to my website, jamesmillerlifeology.com, and click on the page Work with James. Fill out that form, and it will be sent directly to me. Don't let another day go by without finding your way. Your change can start today. Once again, go to jamesmillerlifeology.com and click on the page Work with James. Fill out that form to get started today. When it doesn't make sense. Life happens to all of us. Doesn't matter if you're considered a quote good or quote bad person. Life is going to happen to all of us. What do we do when tragedy strikes? What do we do when something just simply does not make sense? There is a proper time for grief, which is very important to recognize. When you can validate your own experience, it helps you start the journey of what to do next. One of the most difficult things, though, is when we do focus on that question or those thoughts of it just does not make sense. Why did this person leave? Why did this person pass away? Why did I lose my job? Why do I have this terminal disease? None of it makes sense. It's really a huge question that we all grapple with at times. When we look at the 5 stages of grief, they are denial, anger, bartering or bargaining, sadness, and eventually acceptance. They don't go in a linear order like that, as at times you repeat different stages until eventually you do get to acceptance. When we have the thoughts that it just doesn't make sense, that cycle will often start over and over and over again. One way to try and figure it out is to use what's called radical acceptance. In my field, that's a fancy term which basically says you accept the facts as they are. Doesn't mean you agree with it, doesn't mean it discounts what you've lost or the tragedy you've experienced. It just simply looks at the facts as they are. These are the facts that are in my life right this second. So after you've experienced what you feel is an appropriate and healthy level of grief, then it's a time to use radical acceptance. Radical acceptance, when it comes to grief, is essentially saying, this is my life today. These are the facts of what has transpired. Now, what do I do with it? Now, some of you hearing this right now may think, well, James, that discounts or minimizes the heartache I've experienced. But remember, we're focusing on facts. We're not focusing on emotions. We're not focusing on the heartache you've experienced. We focus on what is in front of me today and what am I going to do with it. One thing I always tell people who have experienced extreme loss or tragedy, the deeper the grief, the more it reflects how deep your love was for that person. So as you're looking at this radical acceptance, my life is different. Doesn't mean my life is better. Doesn't mean my life is worse. It is simply different. When we compare what was versus what is, they will never equal each other. What was in our mind, in our heart, was always better. And what is or what will always be less than. So that's why we don't compare the two. However, what we do is say, these are the facts and what do I do with it? The problem is that when we keep coming back to that question or those thoughts of it just doesn't make sense, that puts us in the mindset of what happened yesterday or how our past was in the past. And yes, once again, there's an appropriate time of grief and loss and reflection. But if you want to move forward in your life, and once again, forward doesn't mean better or worse, it just simply means different, then it is important to say, these are the facts and what are my options? Each moment when you can focus on what you can do today as opposed to it not making sense from yesterday, it allows you to start to look at your future. The more often you proactively look at your future, the less the thoughts of it not making sense come to mind. The tragedy and loss we've all experienced changes us. However, when you use radical acceptance and not focus on the questions or the thoughts of it not making sense, the more you'll see that there are more chapters in your life. I wanted to take just a quick moment to thank you all who continually support and listen to James Miller Lifeology. I have been so blessed and honored by your continual support. However, I want to make sure that you don't miss out on anything exciting that's happening over here. So go to jamesmillerlifeology.com or lifeology.tv and sign up for the free weekly recap. Each week, I will send you an email which has all the latest radio episodes, YouTube episodes, magazine articles, and self-help products specifically for you. Once again, go to jamesmillerlifeology.com or lifeology.tv and sign up for the free weekly recap. My guest today is Nancy Freund-Bills, whose life was turned upside down in a freak thunderstorm that caused a devastating tragedy. Nancy reviews her books today, The Red Ribbon, that is her inspiring memoir that teaches us how to overcome life struggles and turn them into stepping stones. Welcome to my show, Nancy.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be able to talk to you.
I am looking forward to this. You know, when your information was originally sent to me, my heart went out to you. I've experienced tragic loss in my own life, but in reading your story, I thought, my gosh, you are going to be a wonderful inspiration for my listeners who have overcome tragedies, who have experienced so much. So thank you for being the experts on my show today.
Well, thank you for your kind words.
You're welcome. In 1994, your life completely changed. Can you walk us through what happened?
Oh, sure. It was the middle of July, this time of the year. And I was awakened in the middle of the night, about 3 o'clock in the morning. I was staying with a brother and sister-in-law in Cape Elizabeth, and they had received a phone call. And my sister-in-law came in to the guest room and said to me, get up, get out of bed and get dressed as fast as you can. And I could tell by the tone of her voice that something very terrible had happened. And so we got ourselves together, and before I knew it, I was in the back seat of their car, and we were driving. My brother-in-law was driving like 95 miles an hour to get us from Cape Elizabeth, which is on the coast of Maine, to York, Maine, which is also on the coast, but very close to the New Hampshire border. And on the way, my sister-in-law shared with me that both my husband and my younger son had been hit by lightning.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
They were kayaking, correct?
They had been kayaking out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and suddenly kind of a freak lightning and thunderstorm broke out. On the same afternoon in the Portland area, it was a beautiful day. And so this was, isolated storm. But the rain was really coming down, and then it started hailing, and they had to go just to the very first place they could find shelter, which was a place called Garish Island. There's an old fort there called Fort Foster from World War I. And so they pulled up their kayaks on the beach and ran up a hillside to a concrete bunker. And I'm sure they believed that once they were inside that bunker that they would be safe.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, because, people in situations like that, you do what you always do. You take shelter. And so you don't really think through the aspects of what about the lightning? What about this? What about that? Because very few people have ever been struck by lightning that we know of.
Well,
And so,
it's very rare
yes.
in our country. Only about 300 people are hit by lightning in a year,
Wow.
and of those, only 100 die. So it's a very rare occurrence. And once they were inside, um, I can only imagine what was going through their
Mm-hmm.
heads,
Mm-hmm.
but they must have felt some relief. And they were not the only people who were there. This is a park, and so there had been picnickers. And as soon as the rain got so torrential, all those picnickers got in their cars. So fortunately, as my husband and son were running inside the bunker, there were people who saw them,
Mm. Oh, good. Okay.
which was fortunate as it
Yes.
turned out. Uh, and then um, and then something just incredible happened. A lightning strike just came out of nowhere, and the bunker they were in was on a little hillside. Um, Plus, it was reinforced with steel, and my understanding is that that attracted
Sure.
the lightning, and so the lightning hit the bunker.
Wow. And so when you arrived at where they were, what news were you given?
Well, when I went to the hospital, to York Hospital, where they had been taken, and a friend that I worked with had gotten there before I did, and she came over and put her arms around me, and she had tears rolling down her cheeks, and she said to me, she said, "Your husband's gone."
Oh gosh, Nancy.
She said, but your son is alive, and he's in the ICU. And so then a nurse came and she took me to a room to kiss my husband goodbye. And then I went to the ICU, and my son was on well, he was on two different machines.
Mm-hmm.
One was to keep his heart going, and the other one was he was intubated to help him breathe. So he was in, my younger son was in quite critical condition.
To get that double whammy of
Oh,
your husband that I'm sure with for many, many years.
right. We had been married for 26
Oh
years,
gosh.
and he was a psychologist,
Mm.
and I'm a social worker, and so we we had worked in the same private practice together.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and both of us were very active parents. He was a great
Mm.
dad. Yeah,
Wow. And then to
yeah,
see your son on life support.
right, right. And he was the kind of kid who loved, bicycling,
Mm.
cycling,
They're very
and
active.
running, and mountain climbing, and yeah, and just very muscular,
Mm-hmm.
and just the picture of health.
And then
Yeah.
obviously the comparison of that and seeing him on life support, I'm sure once again was incredibly devastating for you.
It was a terrible shock. Um, and not very long after I arrived at the hospital, my older son arrived, and I also write about his experience in chapter 2. His his experience was much like mine. He had been at Lake George with his wife, and there's no phone there, and so his wife's uncle in the middle of the night had to get on a boat and go out to the family home,
Oh wow.
and wake them up and tell Jeremy, that's my son, my older son, that his dad and his little brother had been in a bad
Mm.
accident. Yeah.
Wow.
So then he and his wife and their beagle named Charlie
That's cute.
had to drive all the way from Lake George to
The hospital.
the hospital in York. Right, thanks.
In situations like this, I mean, we're never prepared for that. You're just never. And sometimes we try and figure things out, like why. I mean, it's so random to have a freak storm come up, and then all of a sudden, both of your husband and your son have been struck by lightning. How did you even come to terms with that? Or can you come to terms with that even?
Well, I think for a long, long time I was in shock. I think maybe even a little, PTSD.
I can imagine.
I knew almost immediately that I couldn't do my regular work. I couldn't be a psychotherapist, an independent psychotherapist, with no backup. I knew I needed to be in therapy. I needed a psychiatrist and a therapist,
Yes.
and so I was lucky. I began working in a hospital as a social worker, and in that kind of a setting, you have doctors who are supervising you, and my main responsibility was to help patients get ready for discharge.
Case management aspects of it.
Case, right, and I could do that. No, but gosh, there was, there at the beginning, everything was what we call in psychology business a trigger. You know that word. And I couldn't listen to any music, to any of the usual music that I was used to. Certainly nothing romantic. I did discover classical music, which I'd never listened to much.
Oh, wow.
And because I didn't have any emotional connections to it, that was quite a comfort.
Oh, wow. And from a brain chemistry standpoint, and some of my listeners may not know this, but classical music is one of the best types of music to find inner peace or to really regulate one's brain chemistry. Because what it does, and I'll try not to get too technical here, it's when you look. How can I do this without being technical? When the music itself, it has a beginning and an end. There has a lot of resolution. And when there's what's called dissonance is two notes that are together, that beat together. What it does is it affects the brain chemistry in our brain. And so what happens is, if that happens at all in classical music, it resolves it. So it takes any of the brain chemistry tension we have, and when it goes to the resolution, it resets our brain chemistry. So that's why classical music is such a powerful, powerful type of music to listen to if anyone is struggling to find any type of internal peace. So you found it and didn't even know it.
Wasn't that? I mean, I had no idea that was the case, but it was very helpful. I also found walking along a beach was very helpful. About 6 months after my husband died, I bought the tiniest little cottage you can imagine at Goose Rocks Beach, which is close to Kennebunkport. And I had a dog, a basset hound named Molly. And so Molly and I would walk along that beach. And sometimes we would, lie down on the beach, and sometimes I would cry. But she would always stick right next to me. And I think being close to nature was one of the best things in the world I could have done.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, first off, thank you so much for sharing this story. I mean, I'm sure my listeners, just like me, are just overwhelmed with grief for you. But we do know that your book, The Red Ribbon, is inspiring so many people. And so with that book, well, let me back up. So the book itself was written because of what? Because of the vow, correct, that you made with your husband?
Well, I made a promise to him that I would write about my experiences and about our family story. But I wanted to tell the story in a very special way. I wanted to write from my most courageous and loving parts.
Mm.
And I think I pulled that off because it seems to really touch people.
Yes, I was reading some of the reviews, and so many people were saying how it's such a powerful book and how it really goes through the full gamut of emotions. And so it really draws the reader in, and it sounds like it's really helped a lot of people as well.
Well, that has kind of come as a surprise. I mean, it's a big bonus.
Sure.
When
That's great.
I started, I thought, well, I have a subject to write about,
Uh-huh.
and I think I have the courage to write about it. I think I can write from a pure heart, but I don't have the writing skills. I knew, even though I'd been an English major and I had a master's degree in 20th century lit, I really had never had much experience doing creative writing. And so I just started taking classes.
Oh, wow.
And for my classes, I would be asked to write a short memoir piece,
Hmm.
and maybe 1,000 words, 1,500 words. And I just kept taking memoir classes and fiction and poetry classes and workshops until finally one of my teachers took me aside and said, "You know, Nancy, you've written a lot of these stories, these memoir pieces that are on the same theme, and
Oh,
I think you should think about writing a book."
wow.
And it was a big surprise.
Hmm.
I mean, she is someone who I really admire, and um, a wonderful teacher. And I thought, gosh, I must be getting pretty good.
We've also won some awards with this book too. That's amazing.
Well, the chapter that you were talking about when I made a promise, and
Uh-huh.
in one of the chapters, I do make a promise to my late husband that I will write the story with love and courage. And I and I really have done my very best to
Wow.
do that.
Wow.
But that chapter did win a big prize. Um, Out of 6,000
Oh my gosh.
entries, it was chosen as the top memoir piece.
That's
Right?
amazing.
It is.
Wow.
It was the writer. A lot of your people probably know the Writer's Digest, not
Uh-huh.
the Reader's
Reader's
Digest, but
Digest. Uh-huh.
the Writer's Digest.
Uh-huh.
Once a year, they have a big competition, and there were maybe 10 categories, um, and I won. My little story won out of 6,000.
Oh my gosh, Nancy, that's amazing. And what I love even more about this is something that was so gut-wrenching for you turns into this, and not that we can compare awards or not, but the fact that something so gut-wrenching and you did your best and you wrote fulfilling the vow to your husband, and then all of a sudden you get rewarded back with something as people recognize how much hard work and the skill set that you have. So I think it's just on so many levels, I think it's just a great acknowledgement to you.
Well, it is. Now I have to tell you something else I'm proud
Oh,
about.
please do.
Okay. Um, there, as a writer, there are just times you really remember.
Hmm.
And these days, you get good news. It doesn't come in the mail. It just comes in a kind of a little ordinary old email. And that's the way the Writer's Digest news came to me. And so then I had to copy it, and then I carried it around in my purse and
Mm.
showed it to anybody who would look
Oh,
at
that's great. Oh, that's wonderful.
it.
I
But
love it.
but a few months ago, something else really lovely happened to me. I'm sure you're familiar with the Kirkus reviews.
Yeah, I saw your review on that. That's great.
And I got a wonderful Kirkus review. When I started reading it, I was kind of saying a little prayer, not a real prayer, because I would only pray about people, not about anything as mundane as review. But I was sure hoping it would be good. So I was saying, oh, please let it be positive. Please let it be positive.
It is.
And then I thought, it is positive.
Yes.
It is positive. And then I got to the very end, and it said, whatever it says, this is
I have it right here. Let me read it for you.
Okay.
Memoirs of loss and survival are rather common, but what sets this one apart is Bill's extraordinary perceptiveness and writing talent, a keeper of a book by a talented author. Kirkus Reviews. That's amazing, Nancy.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So this is definitely a book that my listeners need to purchase. So unfortunately, our time is up for this interview, but if my listeners would like to find out more information about you and to purchase this book, The Red Ribbon, a memoir of lightning and rebuilding after loss, where would they find this information online, Nancy?
Well, they can go to my website, and it's www.nancybills, and my last name is Bills. So nancybills-memoir.com. That will take them to my website, and it has some sample chapters.
Okay.
It has my Kirkus review, and they can purchase my book at any independent bookstore or on Amazon.
Excellent. Well, my listeners also know that if we're not able to find your book, one more time, The Red Ribbon, a memoir of lightning and rebuilding after loss. If they can't find it any other place, just simply go to jamesmillerlifeology.com or lifeology.tv and go to the previous guests section in both stores there, and it will connect you directly with Amazon. Nancy, thank you once again for being a fantastic, inspirational guest.
Oh, James, this has just been delightful. Thank you.
I also want to thank you, my listener, for tuning in today. Please subscribe to this radio show through whichever portal you join me today. Also, please go to my website where you may sign up for the free weekly recap, watch my YouTube episodes, read the articles I've written specifically for you, and purchase my previous guests' self-help products. If you'd like to work with me, be a guest on, or advertise on this show, visit jamesmillerlifeology.com. Be sure to follow me on all social media platforms under the name James Miller Lifeology, except for Twitter, which is James M. Lifeology. Once again, thank you so much for your support, and I'll talk to you soon.
AM/FM 247, the best in talk and music all day and every day.